And as a reminder, those of you who are taking this welcome for credit, your write-up is due to your advisor next Friday. It's now my pleasure to introduce Marie Catherine Marneffe from the Ohio State University. She received her PhD from Stanford under Chris Manning, who spoke here about a year ago. And she's going to tell us about using discourse analysis in order to improve coreference resolution.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the invitation. So this is joint work with Martha Rekassen, who did her postdoc at Stanford, and Chris Potts at Stanford too. And so please, if you don't understand my supposedly charming French accent, don't hesitate to interrupt. The motivation for this work was to provide a compelling illustration of how effort in theoretical linguistics and effort in natural language processing can complement each other, both for constructing models as well as for assessing them in scientific and engineering context. So let's make sure we are all on the same page here. In the 70s, Laurie Cartman had imagined this idea of having a system that's designed to keep track of individuals, that is advanced object mentioned in the text, and for each individual record whatever is said about this. And those individuals is what we refer to as discourse reference. So when we talk, we introduce discourse reference. And we can introduce something that we are going to keep referring back to, or we can introduce something that we're never going to mention again. And so look at these simple sentences, simple discourse here. Joan thanks Sue for all the help she had given. How many discourse referents do we have in that discourse? Not a tricky question. 3. Who are we talking about? Joan, Sue, and so what would be the third one? 3. The head, yeah. So what is she? Sue, okay? She here is going to refer to Sue, okay? So we can say that maybe we have the head here that's also introduced, but we have Joan and Sue, and then she is referring back to Sue. Now, if I do this, Joan thanks Sue for all the help she had received. Who is she? Joan, okay? And now if I do this one, Joan critiques Sue for all the help she had received. Who is she? Sue, okay? So I was going to say humans are super good at this, right? So not make me laugh, right? This is something we do on the fly. There is no problem for us, okay? And so this is, stuff that people wanted to do automatically and doing exactly what we did, trying to solve, pronoun resolution. And the first system is due to Jerry Hobbs in the 70s, and here is one of his examples from some of you who know Shakespeare's Titus, what villain boy, watch me my way to go, Lucius help, stage direction, he kills him. So you better know who is he and who is him if you are the actors on stage and you have to act this. So what do you think he is? What do you think him is? So you want to know who is who?
Titus kills Lucius.
Yes, Titus kills Lucius. So Jerry's system is actually saying that Lucius killed Lucius, but as someone correctly said, this is not correct, right? It's Titus who is actually killing Lucius. So computers have trouble doing that, but we are quite good at doing this. And so just to make sure we all use the same terminology, I'm going to refer to as mentions. So in a text, we have different ways of mentioning discourse entities. Okay? So in this little snippet here, what are the discourse entities that we are talking about? We are talking about Titus, Lucius, and Rome. Okay? And all of these entities I mentioned in the discourse, maybe with different noun phrases. Okay? So we have Titus here, who is referred to as Titus, me, and he. All of those corefer. We have Lucius, villain, boy, and him. All of those noun phrases talk about the same entity. And then we have Lucius, just Lucius, and Rho, just Rho. So you see that here, those four entities, some have different way of referring to them, and then here we have two entities that are only mentioned once in this little snippet. So as I said, some mentions are actually coreferent, and that's what coreference resolution system wants to do. Find mentions that do cluster together because they refer to the same entity. All good? So how do systems start? Usually they just take all the noun phrases in a text and then they try to cluster them into entities that relate. So what we want to do is, given all those, LPs, we would like a system that's going to output those four clusters here. Titus, me, and he together, Lucius, Wilhelm, and him together, and then Lucius and Rho to separate clusters. All good? So let me show you here a little video. And so listen at what's happening. Hopefully this is working. What do I need to do to get this not happening? Normally I just click on this and it should start. Computer is not cooperating with me. So I'm not as good as an actress as Halle Berry, but I will try to play you what's happening there so you get a sense. So Halle Berry was on this Tonight Show and she's talking about what happened to her when she was in the grocery store with her sunglasses on, her daughter on the shoulder, facing towards the woman behind her at the cashier. She was putting her stuff on the line there, and then she was on the cover of a magazine. Halle Berry was on the cover of a magazine, and she heard her daughter say, "Mama, Mama," and then the woman behind her said, "No, no, honey, this is not your mama. This is Halle Berry." "Mama, Mama," and the woman was being adamant about it and said "No, no, this is not your mama. This is Halle Berry." So then Halle Berry said, and so this really annoyed me, and I ripped off my sunglasses and I jerked and I said "I'm Halle Berry, I'm her mother, and she knows what she's talking about." So you're all laughing, so presumably because you understood what was going on there. But so it's quite tricky, right? We have this Halle Berry, the actress, who is also a mom. She's on the picture of a magazine, and the daughter that refers to her mom as mommy, and the other one who is no, this is not your mommy, this is Halle Berry. So this is something that humans are extremely good at. Okay, we do that without any troubles, but it's extremely hard for computers. So those were state-of-the-art results. Graduate reported last year for the tree best system on the data set, that's the standard data set. I'm going to mention it a little bit later to assess coreference resolution. And you see, so those are percentage, you see that it's quite bad. So the Stanford system, 56%, IMS 58%, and then the Berkeley system 60%. So we are, there is improvement to make here. So by default, when we talk about coreference resolution, let's look at this text. We focus on mentions that do corefer. Okay, so in this text here, I highlighted mentions that corefer with the color signs, so photographers, dead, photo manipulation is mentioned twice. The Photoshop there. You have relative pronoun, tilt-shift effect, which. But then we tend to really forget that actually there is a lot of entities that are only mentioned once and then they die. And so here are in red all of those mentions that are, all those entities that are mentioned only one time. So here, you see the difference, and then we calculated this on this, Antelope data, this data set for coreference. So here you see the singleton entity, the number of entities that are singleton, and then in blue the number of entities that have two mention, three mention, etc. So you see the sheer number of singletons here. So here is the kind of same picture, but from a mention perspective. How many mentions are actually singleton mention compared to how many mentions are actually belonging to a coreferent chain. Okay? So the approach we took here was, are we able to a priori tease apart those singletons? Okay, so what we want to do is to have a system that's going to give us the probability of a mention to be part of a coreferent chain or not, and using insight from the dynamic semantics literature. So what I'm going to do is just talk a bit about those linguistic insights, then the data, give you an intrinsic evaluation of this lifespan model that we built, and then an extrinsic evaluation of the lifespan model in helping coreference. So the lifespan model we built, nothing very fancy in terms of machine learning, it's just a logistic regression. We have a binary distinction here. Am I part of a coreferent chain? Am I a singleton? Okay, we are going to predict the coreferent. And the question we wanted to have here is really this one. How is the lifespan of discourse entity shaped by the features of its mention? Okay, and so looking at what a lot of people have been doing since the 70s, looking at the local morphosyntactic features of a mention, whether I'm a noun, whether I'm a proper noun, whether I'm animate, singular. Okay? We're going to get back to this in a minute, but then also look at the syntactic and semantic features of the environment of the mention, which have been talked a lot by linguists. So the features of the lifespan model are going to be morphologic, syntactic, and semantic. And we're going to explicitly use insight about scope of models, negation, and attitude predication, which I'm going to show you an example right away. And then especially focus on the interaction between scope and mention type. And this is hopefully going to be clear in a minute. And so this really traces back to observation made by Cartunen in the 70s. So if you look at this example, Kim skipped an exam question. It was too hard. This is totally okay naturally in English, and you understand that it is referring back to an exam question. Okay, so by default, indefinites excel at introducing new discourse entities. But one of the things that Cartunen observed is when they are under the scope of a model, and so the box kind of indicate the scope here. In red, I put those semantics operator. Kim didn't make a guide. It has a long string. That's a bit odd, right? And so this negation here is actually blocking the property of this indefinite. It cannot really have text level scope, and it conflicts with this pronoun there that you have in the server sentence. Same happened with modality. Kim can make a kite. It has a long string, also that's a bit odd. And so again, Cartunen kind of observed that an indefinite under the scope of a modal auxiliary is blocking this possibility of anaphora. You have the same with quantification and operator. Everyone took a different exam. It was too hard. Same, I think, goes with everyone took an exam. It was too hard. The problem is that here you have like quantificational dependencies between everyone and an exam, kind of goes pairwise, and that conflicts with just having this wide scope pronoun in the second sentence. Then further, Cartunen also observed that you have the same thing with what's called non-factive attitude predications. If I say something like, John wants to catch a fish, do you see it from here? Again, a bit anomalous. So wanting to catch a fish doesn't guarantee the salience and even the existence of the fish. And so fish has no status outside the semantic scope of this attitude predicate one. And that's why it makes it weird to have this pronoun later. Same with claimed. Sandy claims that Jessie bought a bag. It has a great frame, it's possible that Sandy is so unreliable as a source that a bicycle has no status again outside the scope of claims. So this is why it makes it a bit weird.
Excuse me.
Yes?
So whether or not this is true, the pronoun it will anyway refer to a bike ride, whether or not he really bought it or not.
So those were observations made by linguists that apparently a lot of English speakers do share, that if you have something, a Sandy claims that just about the bike, it has a great frame, people feel that this is a bit odd, and that maybe it kind of refer to a bike, but this is not the right way of saying it.
But when we are looking at the problem in terms of NLP, let's say, do you think it and a bike would be connected in the method if a sentence?
Okay, I see your question. Yeah, if you have this, and you would like to corefer it to a bike. But what I'm trying to convey here is the kind of semantic environment that do give some restriction to some entities to be able to be referred back later, and maybe make them more like singleton. Okay? So, of course, Cartman already had observed that sometimes you have pragmatic constraints that kind of, make the picture a little bit more complex. And so this is work that, Simon here at CMU in philosophy, and then I also, a few years ago, looked at, if you have a sentence like the New York Times reported that the bill passed, it was, of course, controversial, then it's totally okay. And even though report is, similar to claims, according to linguistics theory. But what happens here is that the nature of this verb, in conjunction with the subject, make the inference that the complement will pass true, more likely. And this is what's going to enable a bill to have like this kind of text level to exist outside the scope of this report verb and be able to be picked up by pronouns later in the sentence. So even though semantically, maybe you don't have an entailment here that will pass, pragmatically you do. And this, enables in this case a bill to have, a proper continuation with the pronoun it. So the features that we took to construct this model, so let me be clear again. So the model that we have here, the first step is we want to have a model that's going to predict whether a mention is likely to be just a singleton or be able to be referred back to. Yes?
Here about what's mentioned or what is mentioned?
Any mention.
So you can't tell individually with the first mention whether it's going to be part of a coreference chain or not.
I'm not making the difference between first mention or any mention in a clause. If I'm a mention, am I likely to be part of
a
the
coreference? Left to right or just over the whole?
Over the whole. I'm looking at one mention, what's my probability of being part of a correct? I might be the first mention, I might be the last one in the chain. That we are not looking at that. But yeah, good question. So the features we use are, a lot of, time-tested features that have been used by coreference system, looking at type, so pronoun, noun, animacy, person, number, quantification, and definiteness. So indefinite and definite have really can have this referential semantics that pairs naturally with anaphora, but truly quantified entities don't. And something that linguists have also looked at a lot. And then numbers of quantifiers and named entities. So named entity is something like am I a location, a place, a date, percent, something that people in natural language processing look at. So then also, syntactic features that go adapt to centering theory and information structuring. So we know that usually coreferent mentions are going to favor sentence initial position and also core verbal arguments. So how do we operationalize this? we look at what's the grammatical relation often mentioned in the sentence. Also, what's the sentence position? Is it the first word at the beginning, middle, at the end of the last word, and whether it's in coordination. And so, of course, you know, to do that, we use to extract those grammatical rules. We use the Stanford dependencies, which, given a phrase structure trees, gets you a semantic graph where every node in the graph is a word in the sentence, and an edge in the graph is the grammatical relation between two words in the sentence. So the semantic environment that we do care about, you know, are parallel to the example I showed you. We want to look whether a mention is under negation, under a modal, or under an attitude predicate, and then what we are really interested in also is the interaction between those scope and the mention type and the definiteness of the mention. So the data that we use is the English Antonov 2012 data set, where there is a defined training, depth, and text split. You can see that there is a lot of data in this corpus. Originally, this corpus is annotated for coreferent, so an NP that is participating in a chain is marked as such, and also, you know, in which chain it belongs. And what we did is that every NP that's not coreferent is then just singleton. And this makes practical sense because this is how coreferent system do start. They start with every noun phrase. Okay, so we have annotation for coreference, and we have, you know, all the singletons. And again, you look at how many singletons we have in that data. So, giving this data, so the first thing we wanted to do was to see on this huge corpus, do we corroborate the linguistic insight that had been proposed by Kartunen? So Kartunen, you know, proposed those based on constructed examples. But what's happening if we, you know, look at those features that I briefly sketched with those examples? Do we see those kind of patterns in real data? So training this logistic model on the training part, of course, then we can predict what's happening in the depth. And so here I didn't want to give you, you know, lots of numbers. So looking at the weights of the different features, I put them in a category as favoring coreference or disfavoring coreference. So this is totally intuitive. You know, if you are animate, singular, a proper name or name entity, a pronoun, then usually you favor coreference. You are more likely to be part of a coreferent chain. That's what we get, you know, on this big data set. If you are inanimate, plural or mass noun or quantified, this is exactly in line with, you know, linguistic insight. Truly quantified mentions are actually kind of bare from anaphoric properties, or that's a bit more puzzling, indefinites are disfavoring coreference. And we're going to see, you know, why. So in the name entity, as I said, so usually a name entity is going to favor coreference. And we took the 18 Antonov gold standard type for name entities. The ones that do not favor coreference are ordinal, person, something that's, you know, percentage, money, so a money value, or a quantity. And I think that kind of makes sense. I forgot to say Antonov, it's mostly news-like data. And so, you know, often if you kind of, you know, just mention an amount of money, you are unlikely to kind of continue talking about that, right? They sold the company for X amount, and that's it, then you're going to talk about the company. So if we look then at those grammatical features, do we see, you know, what the literature is expecting us to see? And yes, we do. So remember I said that what should favor coreferent? Sentence initial as well as core argument, and that's what we see. Subject and object of a verb, so core argument of a verb are going to favor coreference. If you are in, you know, the mid part of the sentence or the end, then you're disfavoring coreference. If you are not a core argument, so, you know, statistically, you know, in general, you don't favor coreference. So this is really capturing a well-known generalization of reference tracking in English. So what we were really interested interested in is to see what's happening with those semantic environments. And so this is exactly what Cartesian was predicting. If you have mentioned under negation or under modality, often they disfavor coreference. If you have something under an attitude verb, then in general you favor coreference. And so I think this is due to the genre of the corpus. So, according to here, mostly we have sentences like the one I showed you. The New York Times report that something which make the complement often, something that you are kind of believing in, and that enables you to have anaphora here. And then what we wanted to look at was this interaction. And so this is what you see here. So we have this interaction between something, if it's a pronoun or a name or an indefinite, and you see exactly just the quick observation that we made with the example from Cartesian. If I'm an indefinite under the scope of a negation or an indefinite under the scope of a modal, I'm disfavoring coreference. Here on the left, you have that if you are a pronoun or a name, then actually, no matter which environment you are, you don't take scope, and you can just, be referred to. And this attitude verb here, again, I think it stems from the genre that we have, where pragmatically, often something that's under an attitude verb still, gets believed in and gets inferred. So of course, so what we did here is that using this big, NLP corpus, we could test linguistics claims, which had, had been done on constructed examples. And it's kind of nice to see that they do hold. But then, of course, from an NLP perspective, we want to know whether the system is working. And so, yeah, luckily it does do a good job. A majority baseline would be 55% accuracy. So here you have like the accuracy 76%, and then recall and precision, singleton coreferent. I assume I don't have to explain what recall and precision is. Yes?
Can you give an example of when modality and negation is favoring the coreference and when it's not, because it's very difficult to imagine how that's happening. Because some slides back you said that it's disfavoring, and now in the previous slide you said it's favoring.
No. I always said it was not favoring, right?
It's favoring coreference.
Sorry?
Negation with pronoun is favoring coreference.
Yeah. So when it's with an okay, yeah. So so it happens that if you just look at this, it seems that in general it's disfavoring. But then if you look at the interaction with the type, it depends. If you have something that's where am I? Like a pronoun. So basically, what's happening here in this interaction is that it means that something that's a pronoun or a name never takes scope, and so it doesn't matter the environment in which it's always going to let you have the coreference. But the indefinites are much more constrained by the environment they are in, which is exactly what Cartesian had suggested. Does that answer your question? We can talk afterwards. So I mentioned this line. So recall precision for the singleton and coreference, so it's quite good. But then of course, now there is this idea of that if you have a lot of data, maybe you don't need very sophisticated linguistic feature to do the learning for you, but you can just have surface features and they are going to do quite well. And that's what happens. So we use the features from Greg Duret and of Coref system, looking at just what are the words of a mention, what's the first word of my mention, what are two words to the left, 2 words to the right of the mention, and just give this kind of very shallow features to the model, and it does well, actually better than just the linguistics feature. But know that we have now tons of features, right? So you need a big corpus to be able to learn this. But luckily, for the linguist, if you combine those surface feature with the linguistic feature, you still get a boost in performance that's statistically significant. so the model does a little bit better. So the intuition behind the surface feature à la grecque de red are that maybe you're kind of capturing some of the linguistic patterns that are, exactly defined in a hard-coded way. Being from Stanford, you can guess that we wanted to then see whether the system could help the Stanford coreference system, and instead of using logistic regression with a cutoff at half, if I'm above half, I'm going to be coreferent. If I'm below half, I'm going to be singleton. You can look at the decision and look at something that's more confident. So we are going to say that something is singleton only if the probability is below 2 and correct if the probability is above 8. And so, of course, if you do that, what happens? Recall is dropping a lot and precision is getting better. And this is what we want if we want to incorporate stuff in the Stanford system, because the Stanford system is precision driven. So now we have a precision of almost 90% both for correct and singleton, and we're going to use this system to try to help the Stanford coreference system. So the Stanford coreference system is actually a learning system that still exists. So you go through several sieves that are very precise at the top, and then less and less precise to try to get more recall. So what we are going to do is use this lifespan model that gives you a probability of something being correct or not correct as a filtering stage. And so in effect, what are we doing here? We are reducing the search space for the system. Okay? So remember, what those systems have to do is that they have to cluster together mentions that are coreferent, and they are going to be evaluated on those clusters. If from the start we can say, I'm 90% sure that this mention is not coreferent, then we have. So if we do that, we remove actually 33% of the mentions, so that's quite a lot. Okay? And you can guess what the results are going to be, otherwise I will not be talking about that. So this is helping, right? And in the way we expected. So recall is going to drop, but precision is going to increase. So in Coref, you have different way of measuring those clusters, and I gave you all of the 5 measures here. But you can see that systematically, in all different ways of measuring, we have the same pattern. So the black bar are the system with this filtering step, and the gray bar are the Stanford system without the filtering step. And so you see each time the recall is dropping and the precision is increasing, and overall we have a statistically significant F1 improvement. So then what we did is we used this commercial and client system that's going to automatically look at the errors from the system. So this is really a nice application here. So it has this code that's going to just tell you the kind of errors that the Coref system is doing. So it's going to see whether there are missing entities, extra entities, divided entities, or conflated ones. So divided entities, there is an example here. We have the text, one of the Discourse reference is Clinton, referred to as President Clinton, Mr. Clinton, he, the bold here on the 4th line, I, and myself. Okay, all of those mentions are actually referring to President Clinton. If you have the time to read, you will see that I'm not lying, otherwise you can trust me. And what the system is outputting is one cluster with President Clinton and Mr. Clinton, another cluster with I, myself. So here we have a divided entity because it should be all in the same cluster. And it missed one mention, this pronoun he, somewhere in the text. Okay? So using that system, we can just see whether the result that we do get actually really makes sense. And so here is what we have for the Stanford system. The errors above are precision oriented, affecting precision. The errors below are looking at the recall. And you see, so it's not that we are doing well improving on one type of error only. We just get some little improvement here and there, but mainly all the errors that that should affect precision are indeed used. And we can see here the two bottom lines that why is recall dropping? Because we actually do a lot of missing entities and missing mention. And that makes sense, right? Because 90% of the time we were correct, but so we, from the start, discard mentioned that there is no way the system can, put back in. Is that making sense? So of course, recall is going to drop. So the next thing we wanted to look at is, try to incorporate that with the Berkeley Coref system, which is a learning system. So we have a log linear model here. I mentioned ranking architecture. I took this slide from Greg Durett's presentation. So just to give you a little idea of how the system is working. So for every NP in the document, you're going to decide for the first one, of course, the only possibilities is starting a new cluster, but then you can either refer to the cluster, a cluster before you, or start a new cluster, okay, and each one, right? A chance here can either refer back to one, to the second, or start its own cluster, etc. And you see example of a surface feature, for example, a chance, we know that the first word is a, we know also all the word in it, we know the length, and for a cluster representation, we have the word themselves, the part of speech tag themselves, etc. And we are going to just learn probability distribution around this. So in this learning system here, we could then make use of the full, probability that we have of something being a coref or a singleton. And this is what we added just as another feature in the system, when was the probability of the mention to be coreferent, as given by the best model, of course, so the one that was combining the surface and the linguistic features. And so here, very nicely, on all the measures, we have precision going up, again in a significant way, and most of the time recall actually also goes up, right? And so that makes sense, right? Because here now we can also make use of knowing that something is coreferent. Before in the Stanford system that was not part of it at all. So except here in this CFM measure, recall is also going up, and of course, as you can guess, just looking at this graph, I didn't put the F1, that didn't look too cluttered. F1 measure is always going to be much better. Yes?
Have you added the lifespan model as a feature or as a post-processing step of the...
No, as a feature, so it's learning.
Okay.
It's learning, and we build the probabilities. And so again, we could run the Coreferent and claim system to see, on the output what's happening. And so again, above we have errors for precision, below we have errors for recall. And you can see again, it's not that we are doing much better in one type, but just some gain overall that all together is going to lead to this boost. But then you see that there is still some missing entities, missing mention numbers here that the system doesn't deal well. So overall, so one of the measure is what's called the Conan measure, which if I go back, is the average of those three mug, PQ, and CFM measure. And so you see that when we do add this lifespan model as a prefiltering step in the Stanford system, and as a feature in the Berkeley system, we improve the result on reference. And so I showed you the result at the beginning, right? Computers are really bad at this. So any steps, and people have been working on that for a long time. So any step in improving is welcome. And of course, that's going to make machine learning people happy. Machine learning systems here are doing much better than the rule-based one. One of the other thing I wanted to mention is the new perspective on bridging that the lifespan model is giving. So let me briefly mention bridging if you don't know what it is. So I looked into the room, the ceiling was very high. So here we have this coreferent, the room. Of course, we also have an eye. Then we have the ceiling. Okay? But it's the ceiling of what? What are we talking about here? Of the room. Okay. So in a sense, the room is still alive in that second sentence, even though it's not explicitly there. So if the lifespan model that we have is really capturing something about this possibility of an entity to live through the discourse, it should be able to kind of realize that the room here is probably, being able to be mentioned again. And this is, this can be it's not restricted to two-sentence discourse, right? I can say, I looked into the room, the ceiling was very high, the walls were peeling. That's not the case here, but you see how it's like the walls of the room, right? So what we are going to call, so the room here is called an anchor for the bridging. Okay, it's the one that kind of starts this bridging phenomena. We are going to call it a singleton anchor, and stop me if this doesn't make sense, because the way it is annotated in antinodes is in this little discourse, the room is a singleton, right? From a coreference perspective, it's not mentioned again. Okay? So it's not coreferent, we're going to call this a singleton anchor. That's different from a sentence like this one. I looked into the room, it was large, the ceiling was very high. You still have this bridging phenomenon here, the room, the ceiling of the room. But here we have this pronoun it that do refer to the room. Okay? And so here, from the coreference perspective, the room is actually part of a coreferent chain, different from the other one. Okay? And so antinodes have been annotated, 50 documents in antinode have been annotated for bridging by Gueltal in 2013. And looking at that data, so remember there are more than 2,000 documents, right? So this is a small part of the data, but it's better than nothing. And looking at the bridging annotation crossed with the coreferent annotation, we identified 145 singleton anchors. Okay? So stuff that are bridging and are not coreferent. Make sense? So using that, then we also can know in that 50 documents which are true singleton. Okay, singleton that are not part of bridging with one here. You're still with me? So we have those 145 singleton anchors, and then we can randomly sample 145 true singleton. Yes?
Your examples is this ceiling a singleton or a friend? In this case, so what do you identify as ceiling as?
So here the ceiling would be singleton. Yeah, singleton. So what we want to identify here, we want to see whether we can predict a singleton anchor. Okay? Something that anchors the bridge. Not the second. Yeah, it's almost like, it's almost exactly the same, but
you're not getting labels.
no, we are not getting labels for those. Okay, so we are just getting those singleton anchors, and we are taking true singletons. Okay, which this one would be the ceiling. And so we can, and then we see, what's our F1 on this. We did that 1,000 times, and we had an average of 65. So it does F-score. So it does show that those singleton anchors are different from the true singleton in a way that the model is able to capture. Of course, that's not to say that this is the best model for bridging, right? Because bridging has been studied, and you have some linguistic and contextual factors that do allow bridging, which we are not taking into account here, but we just wanted to see whether if this model that's supposed to kind of give you the prediction of the lifespan of something can identify and mention that are going to be the anchor of a bridging. So just to wrap up, so one thing we did is try to to evaluate linguistic theories. So that's how we built this lifespan model. We started actually from this fact that we have a large proportion of singletons entities in discourse, and maybe if you can identify that, then you can help actually any task that forces you to kind of keep track of reference in discourse. And the task here we looked at is coreference resolution. And so we have this lifespan model that is able to tell apart singleton from referent mention. It does corroborate the linguistic insights, and it improves coreferent resolutions. So thank you, and I welcome questions. So it's a crude approximation. So for example, one of the indefinite that has been widely studied is this, right? And that there is we don't have good annotation for indefinite and indefiniteness. So we had an approximation. It was just lexically coded. This was viewed as a demonstrative, and so not coded as an indefinite. So there, I totally agree, there is like some sloppiness there, or I don't know what's the right word in English to say that.
Did you notice the difference between two abstract nouns like freedom or reference to times like cats? Do they have to be different from indefinites that are about individuals?
That's a good question. We didn't look at that. We could look, we have the data, but again, we don't have the allocation for those. Well, I mean, we could look manually, linguists don't mind looking at stuff manually. Yes?
So you said for the anchors that your model has the power to kind of predict whether something is a singleton anchor or not, right? Your lifespan model, it can predict. So is it kind of how do you know that it's working? How do you know that it's able to predict? Have you checked its performance on something, on the prediction, on prediction of anchor entities?
Which part? The lifespan model?
The lifespan.
Yeah, so the lifespan model, we trained it on the trained part of antinodes, and then the result I reported were on the predicting what's happening for the depth set.
But that was also predicting the anchor thing or not?
That was a separate experiment, right? Then we have this lifespan model that has been trained on the training part of antinodes. Then of course we made sure that the 145 singleton anchors that we have are not part of the training that we looked at. And then here again, we have prediction for this singleton anchor and true singleton or non-singleton anchor, whatever you want to call it. Yes.
I've got a question a little bit about types in a case of cross-document coreference.
Good question. Yeah.
In a case of cross-document coreference, I think two people. If we have the same document,
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah, no, it's not doing that, right? We assume that one document is
All of this is on English.
sorry? All of this is on English. Yeah, all of this is on English. You could extend it to other languages.
All languages have
No, languages they do, right? I mean, there are a lot of languages like English, right, where probably you have the same observation. In a different way, yeah. question. So we also are trying to do, some feature selection. And since we have so few data, so this is why earlier in the talk I said, like, look, those surface data feature that works really well when you have a lot of data. But here for this anchor bridging problem, you don't. Right? And there was no systematic selection of features that would always, pop up to the top, depending on the randomly sampled singletons. It would be different. So I don't have a good answer to your question. It's a good question.